Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. HTM here with another PTS patch note update. We're talking about the Markarth DLC this week, and in this video I want to focus on what I think is probably the biggest change, and it has to do with the major and minor buff system. You know, this is definitely one of those patch changes, I think, where let's say you took a break from ESO for a while and then you come back into the game with these amount of changes into a major system, like basically all the buffs in the game, you would wonder what is going on, because a lot has changed and they really didn't devote a lot of time to talking about this. So that's what this video is about. So just briefly, let's go over their explanation, talking about buffs and debuffs. So they said all major and minor buffs and debuffs are hard-coded to go through the server sooner and more effectively, rather than those abilities existing on your characters. The new system will also ensure that no two same buffs or debuffs can ever stack. It will also prioritize duration-based sources, so basically buffs and debuffs, rather than permanent ones, so for example, ones on sets. And then they've basically adjusted the power of everything to fall in line with the set efficiency standards. It's hard to say. And then they've basically aligned all of the major and minor buffs to fall in line with set bonuses, so they reflect a certain value in this magical spreadsheet somewhere. I'm not sure. But basically everything is kind of more standardized into a set of specific values. So again, I'm not saying this is good or bad. I'm just saying this is a major change that you should be aware of if you're interested in ESO, if you're interested in theory crafting and builds, group content, solo content, whatever. There's actually some major changes hidden in this spoiler tag. So let's jump in there next. So the new values can be found below. And again, what they've tried to do is they've tried to make minor buffs worth about the same value as 2 set bonuses, and major buffs equal out to about 4 set bonuses. So we'll see. Minor expedition, so this is our speed buff. This is now increased to 15%, up from 10%. So, Stamsork with Hurricane, even faster now in the Markarth DLC. Major Savagery and Prophecy, this is our 10% critical bonus right now on the live server. That's actually been increased to 12%. That's pretty interesting because they talked about in the lead up to this patch how they're actually reducing crit chance overall. Well, I don't know, because this is actually getting buffed by 2%. Minor Breach. So this is a resistance debuff on the enemy. This value has been increased to almost 3,000. Up from 1320, that's quite an increase there. And then Major Breach. So this is increased to 5948, up from 5280. And also keep in mind, Major Breach is now one effect. Okay, so this now affects both physical and spell resistance equally. It's one debuff, if you want to think of it that way. The enemy's resistances are dropped in both cases. Now look right below that, they say minor and major fracture yeeted from this plane of existence. Basically that means they're gone because they want just one armor debuff called breach. Okay, so we have minor breach and major breach that affects both physical and spell resistance equally, and minor and major fracture, this is gone. Now this has some consequences when we look at builds and specific classes, which I'm going to talk about in another video. Looking at Stamina Wardens specifically, some classes may miss out by not having Fracture anymore unless this gets adjusted for them. But we'll see. Remember, it is just week 1 of the Markarth PTS. So Minor Resolve, this is a minor resistance buff. This is increased up to 2974, up from 1320, so well over doubled there. And then Major Resolve, again, that's physical and spell resistance in one stat. This is increased to 5948, up from 5280. So almost 6,000 resistances there for running your armor buff. That's pretty strong. Minor Fortitude and Endurance and Intellect, these are our basic recovery buffs. So these actually got doubled as well, which is pretty strong overall. So the minor buff is now 20%, up from 10%. And those major recovery buffs, again, health, magicka, and stamina recovery, those are now 40%, up from 20%. These are the buffs that you see on your potions, for example. Those are going to be even more important because 40% increase of recovery is actually massive. That's a massive buff. So, you know, so far everything's looking pretty good. I mean, all of these essentially are buffs so far, right? So things are looking good. Classes are getting stronger, but wait, there's more on our list. And this is where we start to see some of the decreases. Again, I'm not saying these are good or bad necessarily, but you need to be aware of these because your build is definitely going to change. So Minor Defile, this is now 8% down from 15%. The Defile buff, that's of course healing and health recovery, that debuff. So this is not going to be as strong. Same thing with Major Defile. This is now 16% down from 30%. That's a huge reduction in power from what it was previously. Then we've got Major Mending, the healing buff. This is now also 16% down from 25%. And Major Vitality decreased to 16% down from 30%. Okay, so all these that affect your health, your healing taken, and health recovery, these got changed quite a bit. Now moving on to some more. Major Evasion. So this is our AoE damage reduction on things like Deadly Cloak. This decreased slightly down to 20% instead of the usual 25%. Minor Berserk, which is pretty much a staple damage buff in both PvP and PvE. This is decreased now to 5%, down from 8%. Major Berserk as well, one of the strongest combat buffs in the game. This is nerfed significantly, 10% bonus damage now down from 25%. We also see the same thing with armor buffs. The protection series of buffs, Minor Protection, is now 5% damage reduction instead of 8%. And then here's the big one. This is probably the biggest one as far as I'm concerned. Major Protection is decreased to 10% damage reduction down from 30%. Now that is a massive nerf, but it's hard to just look at that by itself and say, well, Major Protection, what's going to happen with it? Because there's so many other changes going into effect here, right? So let's keep going. Minor Maim, this reduces the damage done by an enemy. This is now 5%, down from 15%. That's a huge change in terms of just tanking. Tanks will usually apply that to an enemy. 15% damage reduction now is only 5%. That's a massive cut in damage reduction. Enemies are going to be hitting a lot harder. Same thing with Major Maim. This is now 10% damage reduction, down from 25%. We've got Minor Vulnerability getting decreased as well. So this is 5%, down from 8%. And Major Vulnerability is now 10% down from 25%. I thought this was interesting. Magicka Steel, which is like not really an overpowered buff, this got almost cut in half. So that buff that you get from Elemental Drain, 168 now per hit instead of 300. Trial buffs are getting affected as well. So Major Aegis, Major Slayer, these are now 10% down from 15%. But our damage buffs here, like Minor Courage, Major Courage, these actually got increased. So Minor Courage is now 215 weapon and spell damage. Major Courage, that's going to be 430 weapon and spell damage. That's a huge damage buff. And then Major Force actually got increased as well. That's going to be 20% bonus critical damage up from 15. There is a new debuff that's been added for the Markarth DLC that's called Minor Brittle. That increases the target's critical damage taken by 10%. Now, they also say there's going to be a Major Brittle debuff, but there's no source for this yet. But when this is eventually added to like a set or a skill, that's going to increase the target's critical damage taken by 20%. Then we've got Minor Cowardice. This debuff has been reworked and now reduces the target's weapon and spell damage by 215, rather than increasing their ultimate's cost abilities by 60%. And then there is the new version, Major Cowardice, reduces a target's weapon and spell damage by 430. That's a pretty big debuff there. Then Empower actually got reworked as well. This is another pretty surprising change. This buff now applies to all attacks, light, medium, and heavy attacks, for its duration, and it's no longer consumed on use. So in most cases, you use it with one attack, it's gone, now it's going to have a duration. So the following sources of Empower now last 3 seconds, down from 5 to reflect the change that Empower is no longer consumed. So again, it's an active buff, now for 3 seconds. So you've got the Aegis set, Might of the Guild. This is a passive from the Mages Guild. Empowering Grip, Wrecking Blow, from the two-handed skill line, and then Ambush from the Stamina Nightblade. So overall, a really interesting set of changes, and I think a lot more changes than most people would have expected. Essentially, every buff in the game has been retuned to some level. And again, they weren't incredibly specific about what the goal was, other than just to match these, I don't know, efficiency standards to make it fit in this spreadsheet of values, which I guess on the surface that makes sense, but we're going to have to see how this now affects builds both in PvE and PvP. There's some pretty significant changes when you look at some of the major class skills, major ultimates. The one that stood out to me the most, probably major protection, getting nerfed down to 10%. That's a huge nerf for that buff. So let's say in PvP, for example, you have a Warden on your team running Permafrost. Your group was pretty much invincible for the duration of Permafrost with that 30% damage reduction. Now you're only going to get 10% damage reduction. Is that really going to be that useful to you? Or would you swap that ultimate with something else, maybe for more healing, maybe put on barrier? I don't know. So we'll have to see how it plays out. Again, this is just the week 1 PTS. Imagining that we will see perhaps some changes in these values over the next 4 to 5 weeks. But now I'm curious what you all think about the changes to the major and minor buffs. Let me know in the comment section below. As always, if you like this video, don't forget to like it. Make sure you're subscribed right here for more ESO discussions and PTS review videos just like this one. Until next time, thanks for watching. I will see you around in the next video.